The judge said the words quickly, not because he was in a hurry, exactly, but because quick was the merciful option when a ceremony had the specific quality of this one, the quality of something being completed rather than celebrated. Two people standing in front of him with the particular stillness of individuals who have already made the decision that mattered and are now simply waiting for the formality to catch up. The room was a small office at the back of the county building. In Harrow, a desk, two chairs that hadn't been moved, a window that looked out on the alley behind the feed store. There were 4 people in it: the judge, the bride, the groom, and the bride's father, who stood against the wall with the expression of a man who has done something he believes was necessary, and is discovering that necessary and right are not always the same thing. The bride's name was Sarah Weston. She was 23 years old, and she was wearing the best dress she owned, which was a pale blue cotton that was appropriate for a Sunday service, and not particularly appropriate for anything else, and which she had put on this morning with the focused care of someone doing the last dignified thing available to them in an undignified situation. Her hands were still. She had decided, somewhere between waking up this morning and standing here now, that her hands were going to be still, that she was not going to tremble or cry or show any of the things that were happening inside her on the outside, because the outside was all she had left to control, and she intended to control it. The man beside her was Cole Danvers. She had met him twice before this morning. The first time, for 15 minutes, in the parlor of the house where she and her father had been staying, during which he had said perhaps 12 words, answered her father's questions in the direct manner of someone providing required information rather than making conversation, and left without ceremony. The second time was yesterday, when he had come to confirm the arrangement and sign the papers her father's creditor had drawn up. He was taller than she'd registered the first time, or perhaps the room had been larger then. Dark hair, worn short. A face that had been shaped by years of outdoor work into something that was neither young nor old, but simply set. The way certain landscapes are set, not hostile, not welcoming, simply present. He wore a clean shirt, which she noticed because it told her he had made some effort for the occasion, which was more than she'd expected, and which she did not know what to do with. He had not looked at her since they'd entered the room. The judge said, "Do you, Cole Danvers, take this woman?" he said. "I do. No pause. No performance. Just the words, delivered with the same quality." He delivered everything else direct, plain, meaning exactly what they said and nothing more. The judge turned to her. She felt her father shift against the wall behind her. She thought about the letter she had sent to Thomas, the man she had thought she would marry, back east, before all of this, and the letter that had come back 3 weeks ago, that had said the things that letters say when a man has decided that the situation has become inconvenient. She thought about her mother, 2 years in the ground, who had always said that life rarely looks the way you planned it, and that the looking was less important than the living. She thought about her father's face when he had explained what the debt meant and what the only available solution was. "Sarah," he had said, "I'm so sorry." She had not made him feel better about it. That was the one thing she had refused to do. "Do Sarah Weston, take this man." "I do," she said. Her voice was steady, her hands were still. Outside the window, the alley behind the feed store was empty, and the sky was the flat white of an October morning that has not yet decided what it intends to be. The judge said the final words, and it was done. Cole Danvers turned and looked at her for the first time since they entered the room. She looked back. Whatever she had expected to see in his face, satisfaction, possession, the specific look of a man who has acquired something, was not there. What was there was harder to read. Something that was not unkind, and was not warm, and was not anything she had a ready category for. He said, "I have a wagon outside," she said. "All right." Her father hugged her at the door. She let him. She did not hug back with both arms. Only one, briefly, because she had decided that there were costs he had to carry, and she was not going to absorb them all for him. She walked out into the October morning. She got into the wagon. Cole Danvers climbed up beside her, took the reins, and clicked to the horse. They rode out of Harrow without speaking. Sarah looked straight ahead at the road that led west, away from The town, toward a property she had never seen and a life she had not chosen, and she thought, this is what the rest of my life begins with. She did not think it with self-pity. She thought it with the specific, clear-eyed practicality of a woman who has accepted what cannot be changed and is already thinking about what comes next. She just didn't know yet what came next. Harrow was not a cruel town. This was important to understand. It was not the kind of place that produced the arrangement Sarah found herself in through malice or indifference to human suffering. It was simply a practical town, a town that had been shaped by the practical demands of frontier life into a place where the practical solution was generally the one that prevailed, and where the distance between practical and humane was sometimes larger than anyone paused to examine. The Weston family had arrived 3 months earlier on the afternoon train from the east. Sarah, her father William, and the specific quality of people who have left somewhere in a hurry and are trying not to show it. William Weston had been, in his previous life, a man of modest means and significant debt. Not through dishonesty, not through recklessness exactly, but through the accumulation of small wrong turns that the wrong year and the wrong economy had turned into something unsurvivable. He had come west because west was where people came when east had run out of options. The man he owed money to, a creditor named Harlan Pierce, who operated out of an office on the main street of Harrow and had the particular manner of someone who has found a way to make other people's difficulties profitable and has been doing it long enough that he considers it simply commerce, had followed the debt west, which debts of sufficient size tend to do. Pierce had given William Weston a choice. The choice, as Pierce presented it, was between the debt being called in full, which would leave the Westons with nothing, the sum being beyond any realistic capacity to pay, or an arrangement. Pierce had a business associate, a man who ran land in the valley west of Harrow, who was looking for a wife. A practical arrangement, common enough in this part of the country, Pierce said, as if the commonality of a thing determined its acceptability. William Weston had sat with this for 2 days. On the 3rd day, he had called Sarah into the kitchen and told her. She had not said anything for a long time. Then she had said, "Who is the man?" Cole Danvers, her father told her, known in the territory for being capable, being solitary, being a man who kept to himself and ran his land well, and had not, as far as anyone knew, been in significant trouble of any kind. He was not liked in Harrow, exactly. Not disliked either. He was simply present in the way of certain people who move through a community without becoming part of it, acquiring a reputation made more of absence than of fact. The rumors were of the kind that attached to silent men, that he was dangerous, that his previous wife had died under circumstances that weren't discussed, that he had a temper he kept controlled, and that the controlling of it was the relevant thing to know about. Sarah had met him in the parlor, 15 minutes, 12 words. She had looked for the danger in him and had found instead something she couldn't categorize, a quality of containment that could have been threat or could have been grief or could have been simply the habitual reserve of a man who had stopped spending energy on the opinions of people he didn't know. She had come away from the meeting knowing almost nothing. She had said yes anyway, because the alternative was her family's destruction, and because she was 23 years old and had her mother's stubbornness, and had decided that she was going to find a way through this the way her mother would have found a way through it. Not by pretending it was fine, but by refusing to let it be the last thing. The town of Harrow watched her leave in Cole Danvers's wagon on the morning of the wedding with the specific mixture of sympathy and relief that communities feel when a difficult situation has resolved itself in a way that doesn't require them to do anything. Agnes Fry at the boarding house told Martha Elgin at the general store that she felt sorry for the girl. Martha Elgin said she'd heard Cole Danvers was not actually a bad man, just a particular one. Agnes Fry said there was a difference. Neither of them had an answer to that. She had been, before all of this, a specific kind of person, naive. She had grown up in a household that had known difficulty and had learned early that difficulty was not a temporary condition to be waited out, but a permanent feature of the landscape to be navigated, but hopeful in the specific way of someone who has managed difficulty before and has evidence that managing it is possible. She had wanted to be a teacher, This was not an unusual ambition for a woman of her time and circumstance, but it had been a genuine one, not a fallback. Not what you said when someone asked because it was acceptable, but a real desire that had grown from the specific pleasure she took in explaining things, in watching the moment when a concept landed in a mind that had been working to receive it. She had taught the younger children in her neighborhood informally for 2 years, and the woman who had run the school had told her she had a genuine gift for it, which she had held quietly and carefully, the way you hold things you don't want to jinx. She had been, before the journey west, in the early stages of something with Thomas Aldridge, a man she had known since she was 16, who had brown eyes and a dry humor, and who had told her, in the summer before everything collapsed, that he intended to ask her father something important when the time was right. The time had not been right. The time had never become right because, by the time the summer ended, everything had shifted and the asking had been postponed, and then postponed further, and then replaced by a letter that used words like circumstances and practical considerations. And I think you understand, in a way that made the words feel like the walls of a room she was being locked out of. She had burned the letter, not dramatically, practically, in the kitchen stove, because paper burned and ash didn't accuse you of anything. She had not told her father about the letter. He had enough. The journey west had taken 3 weeks on the train and had been the specific, suspended experience of a life between things. Not the life she'd had and not the life she was going to. Just the motion between them. The days passing through windows of changing landscape. She had watched the country change from the familiar east to the wide, indifferent west, and had felt herself change too, in ways she couldn't name yet. The person she'd been in the east becoming less available to her with each mile. When her father had called her into the kitchen, she had already known something was coming. She had not known what. Afterward, sitting in the narrow room of the boarding house, she had thought about her mother, not the death, the life. The specific quality her mother had brought to difficult things, which was neither resignation or false cheer, but something more durable than either. A woman who had faced what came, and had not pretended it was other than it was, and had found a way to be herself within it. You have more of me in you than you know, her mother had said once. When Sarah was 15 and struggling with something she couldn't name, she thought about that now. She thought about it in the wagon beside Cole Danvers as the road west unrolled in front of them, the town of Harrow getting smaller behind, the valley opening up ahead, with the particular amplitude of western landscape that could mean freedom or loneliness, depending on what you brought to it. She brought, at this moment, mostly fear, but she also brought the thing her mother had left her, which was the knowledge, not belief, knowledge from evidence. That fear was not the same as the end of things. It was just what the beginning of certain things felt like. She looked at the man beside her, who was looking at the road ahead with the expression he seemed to bring to everything, which was focused and closed and entirely elsewhere. She thought, I don't know who you are, she thought. I'm going to have to find out. She looked back at the road. The wagon moved west. The property was not what she had imagined. She had imagined, based on the rumors and the man and the transaction that had produced her presence here, something that matched the atmosphere of all of it. Grim, functional, the kind of place that existed for purpose rather than for living. She had prepared herself for something that confirmed the worst of what she feared. What she found was different. The land was good. She could see that even through the eyes of someone who had not grown up with land. The specific richness of soil that had been worked well over years. The cattle in the south pasture that were healthy and well kept. The fences that were maintained to a standard beyond what strict necessity required. The cabin was not large, but it was sound, solid construction. A porch that ran the length of the front. A garden plot on the east side that had been put to bed for winter, but showed evidence of having been worked earlier in the season. It was, she thought with a surprise she kept internal, a place that someone had taken care of. The inside was the same, functional, spare, but clean, with the specific cleanliness of someone for whom order was not imposed from outside, but came from inside. The habit of a person who lived alone and had not let the living alone become an excuse for anything. He showed her the house, the way he did everything directly, without performance. This is the kitchen. This is where the wood is kept. This door sticks in wet, lift and push. The bedroom at the end of the hall is yours. He had moved his things to the smaller room across from it. She had not expected that. He saw her notice and said, "The arrangement is what it is. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" She said. "It means you have your room," he said, "and I have mine, and we'll figure out the rest as it comes." He went back outside. She stood in her room, which was modest and cold, and had a window that looked out on the east pasture and the mountains beyond it, and tried to determine what she felt about that exchange. She had expected something to be afraid of. She had been preparing for something to be afraid of. She had not prepared for a man who moved her things from his room without being asked, and stated the situation plainly, and went back to work. The first dinner was what she had anticipated, or close to it. He cooked, which surprised her, with the efficiency of someone who has been cooking for himself for a long time, and has no feelings about it either way. He set the table for two, which also surprised her, and sat across from her and ate without speaking beyond the passing of things. She said, "You cook. Have to eat," he said. "I can cook," she said. "If that would be, we'll work it out," he said. They ate. After dinner, he washed the dishes. She moved to help, and he said it was fine without being rude about it. And then he told her he would be up early, and if she needed anything, there were extra blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed. He went to his room. She sat at the kitchen table for a while in the lamplight. She had been afraid of this man for 3 months, based on the things people said about him, and the way he carried himself, and the transaction that had brought her here. She had built, from those materials, a version of him that she had been bracing against. The version of him that had moved his things from his room and cooked dinner and said, "We'll figure out the rest as it comes," did not match the one she built. She did not know what to do with this. She went to bed. In the night, she woke to the sound of wind against the window and lay in the dark of an unfamiliar room in an unfamiliar place beside an unfamiliar life, and felt the full weight of all of it. She did not cry. She had decided not to cry tonight, on the grounds that crying was fine, and she would do it when it was useful, and tonight it was not useful. She noticed, lying there, that the lamp in the hallway was lit, just a low light, enough to see by if you needed to move through the house in the night. She had not lit it. She lay in the dark and looked at the light under her door and thought about a man who lit the hallway lamp for a wife who was afraid in the night, without asking whether she was afraid or telling her he'd done it. She lay there for a long time. She did not know what to do with that either. 3 weeks passed. They were not easy weeks, and they were not comfortable weeks in the way that comfort requires a certain amount of ease between people that had not yet developed. But they were functional weeks, the specific functionality of two people who are both capable, and who have tacitly agreed to make the arrangement work without having discussed making the arrangement work. She cooked 3 times a week. He cooked the other nights. The arrangement had developed without being stated. She found the garden tools in the shed, and asked if she could use the east plot in the spring. He said it was her plot. She could do what she wanted with it. She started planning what she would plant, which gave her mornings a forward direction that the mornings had been lacking. She found the shelf of books in the sitting room, not many, maybe 15, worn from reading, and worked through them in the evenings. He noticed and said nothing, which she came to understand was his version of approval. He was not warm, but he was not cold in the way she had feared. Not indifferent, not dismissive, not the man who had no heart that the rumors described. He was simply contained, in the way of someone who has learned that expression is a thing you manage carefully, or you lose things you can't afford to lose. She was beginning to understand, without knowing yet why, that he had lost things he couldn't afford to lose. She was in the kitchen on a Thursday morning, the 21st day, when she heard the wagon on the road. She looked out the window and saw it was not a neighbor. She knew before she saw his face because she knew the particular quality of a certain kind of man. From a certain kind of encounter, the specific way that men who have power over other people carry it. Harlan Pierce sat in the wagon with the ease of someone who has not come to ask anything, but to remind someone of something. He got down. Cole was somewhere on the property. She had heard him in the north pasture earlier. She did not know if he had seen the wagon. Pierce came to the door and knocked. She opened it. He looked at her with the specific assessment of a man determining whether an asset is performing its function. He said things about the debt, about arrangements, about how he trusted everything was satisfactory, about how it was important to him that business arrangements were honored in their full spirit, rather than just their letter. The implication of what he was saying was clear in what he didn't say. She felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the October air. She heard boots on the porch. Cole came around the corner of the house and stopped at the edge of the porch and looked at Pierce. Pierce looked at him. There was a moment, the specific moment of a situation that is determining what it is going to be, in which nothing was said and everything was communicated. Cole stepped between them, not dramatically, not with the performance of a man making a show of protection. He simply moved to a position that placed him between Sarah and Pierce, with the matter-of-fact deliberateness of someone rearranging furniture. This goes here now, because that's where it goes. He looked at Pierce and said, "This is my property." Pierce said, "I understand that." "I was simply, this is my property," Cole said again. "And this is my wife. The business between you and the Westons is finished. If you have concerns about the terms of what was agreed, talk to a lawyer. If you come to this property again for any other reason, we'll have a different conversation." He said all of this with the specific quality of a man who is not threatening anything because the statement of facts is sufficient. Pierce looked at him for a long moment. Then he got back in his wagon. He drove away. Cole stood on the porch and watched until the wagon was off the property. Sarah stood behind him and looked at the back of his head and felt something shift in her chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. He turned. He looked at her with that expression she had been trying to read for 3 weeks, the one that was contained and unreadable, and somehow she was beginning to understand. Not unkind. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. He went back to the north pasture. She stood on the porch for a while after he was gone. She thought about what she had seen in his face when he stepped between her and Pierce. She had been looking for anger, the anger of a man defending territory, defending property, the way men in that world defended things. She had not found anger. She had found something quieter and more fundamental than anger, something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like the simple and non-negotiable conviction that what Pierce had been doing was wrong and that he was not going to allow it to continue. But because she was his. Because it was wrong. The distinction was, she was beginning to understand everything. She asked Abe Morse. She had been to the town 3 times in the 3 weeks since the wedding, for supplies, for a letter she wanted to post, once, simply to be among people for an hour, which was a need she had not expected, and which she managed without showing. Abe Morse ran the livery, and was, as far as she could tell, the person in Harrow who had known Cole Danvers longest without either idolizing him or fearing him. He was a compact man of about 50 with the specific observational quality of someone who has spent a career reading horses and people, and has found the reading skills transfer between the two. She went to him on the 4th week, a Tuesday, the wagon, needing a wheel, looked at, and while he worked, she asked in the careful way of someone who needs information and knows that the way you ask for it determines whether you get it. She said, "How long have you known him?" 12 years, Abe said, without looking up from the wheel. "What was he like before?" she said. Abe was quiet for a moment. "Different," he said. "Different how?" she said. Abe set down his tool and looked at her with the assessment of a man determining what a question is actually asking. He talked to you about Margaret? He said. No, she said. Abe looked at the wheel. Margaret was his wife, he said. 7 years ago. She came from a family in Kansas. Came out here with him when he was building the property up. He paused. She was the kind of woman who made things warmer by being in them. You know the type. Sarah waited. The winter of their second year was bad, Abe said. Cold came early and hard. She got sick. Fever, the kind that gets in the chest. The doctor in Harrow was 2 hours away, and the road was bad. And Cole rode for him in the middle of the night in a storm. He paused. Doctor couldn't get through until morning. By morning, she was gone. Sarah was quiet. He never said it was his fault, Abe said. He never said much about it at all. But he sold the east parcel of land the following spring, and bought a better horse, and has never since been more than 20 minutes from town on any given day. 12 years, and I've never seen him outside that range. He looked at her. Make of that what you will. She made of it what it was. She asked. Why did he agree to the arrangement? With Pierce. With my father. Abe was quiet again. Pierce had a note, he said, against a piece of property in the valley that had belonged to a family named Cotter. Good people. Pierce was going to call it in. Would have left them with nothing. Cole bought the note off Pierce about 6 months ago. Paid over the odds for it. She looked at him. Why? She said. Because the Cotters had nowhere to go, Abe said. And because he had the money and Pierce had the note. And it was the right thing. She understood. Slowly. Where this was going. The arrangement, she said. With my father. Pierce offered Cole the arrangement as part of the note transaction, Abe said. His way of getting something back. He knew Cole would take the deal if it meant the Cotter note was part of it. She sat with this. He agreed to marry me, she said. As part of a transaction to protect another family's land. From what I understand, Abe said carefully. Yes, and he never told me, she said. He wouldn't, Abe said. He doesn't do things so people know he did them. He does them because they need doing. She paid for the wheel repair and drove back to the property. She did not cry until she was past the town and on the open road, where no one could see her. Not from sadness. Or not only from sadness. She cried from the specific feeling of a person who has been carrying a weight and has just been told that someone was holding part of it for them without telling them. Which is a particular kind of relief that comes out of the eyes before it can be processed anywhere else, she thought. About a man who had ridden through a winter storm for a doctor and had arrived too late and had spent 12 years making sure he was never too far from help again, she thought. About a man who had bought a stranger's debt and paid over the odds for it and accepted a wife he hadn't sought as part of the price and had never said a word about any of it. She thought about a hallway, lamplit in the night for a woman who was afraid in an unfamiliar place. She drove home. She set the table for dinner with the specific care of someone who is doing a small thing to stand in for a large thing they don't yet know how to say. The change was not dramatic. Nothing about the way things shifted between them had the quality of a scene or a moment. It was slower than that and more honest than that. The kind of change that happens in the accumulation of ordinary days, rather than in any single one. She started telling him things. Not personal things at first. Practical things. Observations. The small information of daily life. She had seen the horses doing something he might want to know about. She had found a better way to store the winter vegetables. The east fence had a post that was looking uncertain. He listened. He responded. The responses were brief. He was not going to become a different kind of man. She understood that, but they were genuine. The engagement of someone who was paying attention rather than simply being present. She asked him questions about the land. This was the right territory. She could see it immediately. The way his manner changed when the subject was the property. The specific unlocking of a man talking about something he cared about in a way he didn't have to guard. He talked about the soil composition in the north pasture and what it meant for the spring. He talked about the cattle with the quiet expertise of someone who had spent years learning what expertise in that area required. He talked about water the creek to the west, its behavior in different seasons. The management of it. She listened to all of it. Not to be polite, because it was interesting. Because understanding the land was understanding the life. And because when he talked about these things, the contained quality of him opened slightly in a way she found she wanted to see more of. He started telling her things too. Small ones at first. A history of the property, the years of building it, the decisions that had shaped it. The names of the cattle, delivered without self-consciousness, which told her something. She filed carefully. The way the mountain to the north changed color before a storm. She planted the garden in the first warmth of November earlier than most would, but the plot was sheltered and she had done her calculations. He watched from a distance and said nothing. 3 days later, she found a low fence around it that hadn't been there before, the lumber fresh, the construction sound. She went to find him in the barn. The fence, she said. Cattle were getting close to it, he said, without looking up from what he was doing. Thank you, she said. He nodded. She started to go. You're putting in winter vegetables, he said. Yes, she said. Smart, he said. Just that word. Delivered to the thing he was working on rather than to her, which was his version of a compliment, and which she recognized as such, and received accordingly. She went back to the garden, she knelt in the soil, and worked with her hands, and felt, for the first time since the train had left the east, something that was not the absence of her previous life, but the presence of this one, the specific weight of dirt on her hands, and the cold air on her face, and the knowledge that the fence behind her had been built by a man who had not said why. She knew why. In the evenings they sat in the sitting room, she reading, he working on the accounts or the harness or whatever needed doing. The silence had changed its quality somewhere in the preceding weeks. It was the same silence, the same absence of talk, but it had stopped being the silence of two strangers and had become the silence of two people who had found that they could be in the same room without it costing either of them anything. One evening in late November, she said something that surprised both of them. A small observation about the book she was reading, a dry remark about one of the characters, delivered without thinking, because it had been in her head and had come out. He looked up. There was a pause. He said something back, equally dry, a response that showed he had been listening even though he appeared to be attending to something else. She laughed. It was brief and genuine, and it surprised her the way a sound surprises you when you haven't heard it in a long time and had forgotten what it sounded like. He looked slightly surprised, too. Then something in his face did what she had not seen it do before. Not a smile exactly, but the movement toward one. The acknowledgement that something was funny in the quiet way that humor lives in people who don't perform it. They looked at each other for a moment. Then they both looked away, back to their respective things, and the silence came back. But it was different again, warmer than before, with something in it now that hadn't been there. She did not name it. She was not ready to name it, but she knew what it was. 6 months after the wedding, Sarah West and Sarah Danvers, though she was still getting used to that, sat at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning and wrote a letter to her sister back east. Her sister had written 3 times since the wedding, letters full of careful questions that were really asking one question, which was, "Are you all right?" She had written back twice with letters that answered the question without quite answering it. She was well, the property was good, she was managing true things, but not the whole of the truth. Because the whole of the truth had been changing, and she had been waiting to understand what it was changing into before she tried to put it in a letter. She thought she understood now. She wrote, "I want to tell you about the man I married, because I think what I told you before wasn't enough. I told you he was quiet, and he is. I told you he was difficult to know, and he is that too. What I didn't tell you, because I didn't know yet, is that difficult to know is not the same as not worth knowing. I've been thinking about what it means to be honest. Not dishonest in the way of lying, honest in the deeper way, the way of not pretending things are other than they are. He is the most honest person I have ever known. He doesn't tell me things are fine when they aren't. He doesn't say what he means to be kind, instead of saying what he means. He says what he means, and what he means is usually more than I expected. There are things I have learned about him that I learned from other people, not from him, because he doesn't explain himself. He does what he does, and expects no account of it. I have decided to stop being frustrated by this and start understanding it as what it is. A man who does the right thing because it is right, not because someone is watching. I'm not telling you I love him. I'm not sure what I'm telling you. I'm telling you that the life I didn't choose has things in it that the life I had planned did not. And that some of those things are turning out to matter more than I knew how to measure when I was still mourning the life I planned. The garden is good. I put in winter vegetables in November against everyone's advice, and they're coming up. He built a fence around it without being asked, and without explaining why. That's the man I married. I think you should know that. She folded the letter and set it aside to be posted on Tuesday. She went outside. The morning was the particular morning of a late spring in that part of the West. Cool still, but with the warmth coming, the specific quality of a season that has stopped being the end of one thing and has become the beginning of something. The mountains to the north were the pale morning blue. They turned at this hour. The garden was doing what she had believed it would do, despite the general opinion of the territory about the timing. She heard boots on the porch. She turned. Cole was coming out of the house with 2 cups, which he did sometimes now, made coffee and came out to where she was without being asked, without making it anything other than a practical thing. 2 cups made, and one handed to whoever was nearby. He handed her one. He stood beside her. They looked at the garden and the mountains and the morning in the silence that had become their particular silence. Not the silence of 2 people with nothing to say, but the silence of 2 people who have found that being in the same place is sufficient, and that the adding of words would not improve it. She thought about the woman who had stood in a county building in October with still hands and a pale blue dress, and the conviction that her life was over. She thought about the letter she had just written, and whether it said what she meant, and decided it didn't entirely, but that the entirely would take longer than a letter. She thought about Thomas Aldridge and the letter that had come back, and realized, with the specific surprise of a feeling that has resolved without your noticing, that the thinking of him no longer had the quality of loss. It had the quality of history, which was different. A thing that had happened and had been part of getting here. Wherever here was. Here was a porch in the spring morning, with a cup of coffee and a man beside her who had lit her hallway lamp and built a fence around her garden and stepped between her and Harlan Pierce, without being asked, and had never once explained any of it. She said, "The mountains turn that color right before the light changes." He looked at the mountains. "Yes," he said. "You know everything about this land," she said. "Most of it," he said. She looked at him. "You could teach me," she said. He looked at her. Something in his face did the thing it did sometimes. Now the movement toward warmth. The small opening of something that was usually kept closed. "All right," he said. She looked back at the mountains. The light was changing, the way she had said it would. The pale blue going gold as the sun found the angle it had been working toward. The mountains becoming the mountains they would be for the rest of the day. She thought, "I am going to be all right." Not as a comfort she was offering herself, as a thing she knew. She thought, "This is not the life I planned." She thought, "It is, in ways I did not expect, and cannot yet fully account for." Enough. She stood on the porch in the spring morning, and drank her coffee, and let the morning be what it was, and felt the specific thing that she had not felt in longer than she could precisely measure, the feeling of being in a place, and finding the place adequate. Finding it, against all expectation, good. The man beside her said nothing. She said nothing. The mountains were gold now. Fully, the light having arrived at where it was going. She came to that land, afraid of the man she married. She stayed because of the man he turned out to be. Sometimes, the life you didn't choose becomes the life you can't imagine leaving. Not because it's perfect. Not because it gave you everything you wanted, but because it gave you something you didn't know you needed. A person who does the right thing when no one is watching, who lights the lamp in the hallway and builds the fence around the garden and steps between you and the thing that threatens you, not because you belong to him, but because that is simply who he is, and that, it turns out, is everything. If this emotional cowboy story touched your heart, subscribe to Broken Spur Stories for more Western redemption stories filled with love, sacrifice, and the quiet courage of the Old West. And tell us in the comments, do you believe that love can grow where it was never planted? Because Cole and Sarah did.